We are here today to talk about the threat to privacy and safety in House Bill 4253 and Senate Bill 735, the so-called gender identity non-discrimination bills. It is important that we as the public understand the facts about these bills. We have been told that this legislation is necessary to prevent discrimination in places of public accommodation, like restaurants, movie theaters, hospitals. Let me be very clear. Those claims are simply false. Right now, under existing Massachusetts law, if someone believes they have been discriminated against because of their gender identity in a restaurant, they can file a claim with the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, the state administrative agency authorized to handle all discrimination claims. If this gender identity legislation were to pass, the process for addressing discrimination claims in public accommodations would remain exactly as it is now. In fact, MCAD has publicly reported the successful adjudication of just such a claim. The same can be said about hospitals. MCAD has successfully adjudicated a claim of gender identity discrimination in a hospital in a situation where a woman who identified as a man wanted to be artificially inseminated. Now, the hospital felt it didn't have the professional expertise to handle such a unique scenario and politely demurred. This was prosecuted as discrimination on the basis of gender identity by the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. If the bathroom bill is passed, the legal recourse for someone who believes they have been discriminated against on the basis of gender identity in a hospital will remain exactly the same. However, right now, if a man wishes to express himself as female and enters a woman's locker room, bathroom, or fitness center, or homeless shelter, he can be asked to leave and to use the men's facility by the real women whose privacy and safety are threatened by his presence. If this bathroom bill is passed, however, those real women and children will have no power to object to that man's presence, or even to his disrobing in the same room with them, when they themselves may be in various stages of undress. In short, if this legislation is passed, women and children will have no protection against being ogled by or exposed to naked men. This is why we refer to this legislation as the bathroom bill, because that is the principal effect of this law passing, eliminating common sense privacy protections, especially for women and children. This needs to be made clear. Many legislators may not understand exactly how this bill works and be taken in by claims of discrimination in public places other than bathrooms and locker rooms. Now again, the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination has been crystal clear they already cover such claims. Under existing Massachusetts law and administrative policy, gender identity already trumps any and all objections, with the one very important exception of intimate places where people are exposed and particularly vulnerable, where the desire to express one's current gender identity runs up against the right to privacy of everyone else. And this is why we've called this press conference, so that the public and their representatives in the Massachusetts legislature can hear directly from someone like Kaylee Trilly, a young woman and mother who makes a powerful and personal case against dismissing or invading the privacy rights of women and children in public restrooms and changing facilities. Now, when I objected to this legislation at the public hearing last fall on behalf of my wife and 6-year-old daughter, I was dismissed as if I were a racist. The Attorney General of Massachusetts recently dismissed me and all the citizens who have objections to this bill by telling us we can just hold it if we feel uncomfortable or threatened in a bathroom. So I would ask the Attorney General, and I would ask the legislators to listen very carefully to what Ms. Triller has to say, and know that she speaks for millions of mothers, fathers, children, and concerned citizens, not just in Massachusetts, but as this issue has erupted nationally in the past weeks, for those of us all across the country. It is my great pleasure at this time to introduce Kaylee Triller.
Good afternoon. I'm pleased to be here today, and I'm honored to be here today, and I'm grateful that you are willing to take your time in the middle of a busy work week to listen. I myself am not a political person, or have not been until this point. I think that's important to note. I just want to get along with everybody. And so for me to find myself in the middle of this discussion is a little bit bewildering, but here we are. So in the next few minutes, I would just like to invite you to consider this issue from a perspective you may not hear. Because when we hear buzzwords like discrimination, the immediate human instinct is to recoil and say, I won't have that. And I think that's a travesty, because what's happening is that there are a lot of voices that are already silenced too often that have not been given a chance to be heard when it comes to these policies. So I'm just going to tell you my story, and thank you for listening. About a year ago, I was working as a communications director for the YMCA Pearson-Kitsap counties in my home state of Washington. I had worked for the Y for about 17 years by this point. I was raised at the Y. My parents both worked there when I was little. There's still a picture of me on the wall as a child at swimming lessons. This is my home. These are my people. It's my family. And as a communications director, my boss came to me and said, Kaylee, we've got this new controversial topic coming up, and I need you to draft some talking points for us. And normally, that would be my favorite type of challenge. I like to find the positive and spin it in a good way. But I went home and I read these documents that she'd handed me to inform this discussion, and my heart sank. Because what I realized she was asking me to do was to draft talking points to sell what would become gender identity-based bathroom and locker room access. Now, to give you some context for this discussion, because I'd worked at the Y for so long, I had worked in pretty much every single capacity there was. My first job, ironically enough, as a 15-year-old, was locker room monitor. But over those 17 years, I had run regular sex offender screenings on my own time to make sure that our members were safe and that sex offenders were not infiltrating our database. The Y had they'd done due diligence to make sure that wasn't the case, but I knew that predators seek opportunity, and so on my own, I would regularly conduct these checks. And I will tell you that every single time I ever ran one of these things, I would find somebody who'd gotten through the system, because that's what predators do. They prey and they seek opportunity. In November alone, I found 3. These are violent offenders against women. So I knew that they were already in our system. But the bigger piece of this discussion for me, the bigger reason this was an issue, is because for the first 10 years of my life, I was sexually abused. It's not something I'd ever spoken about publicly before this. In fact, I had judged my own healing by my ability to not have to talk about it at all. But my particular abuser enjoyed watching me in the shower. He would stand there and watch me and laugh. And I was so ashamed. And if I didn't do what he wanted or cooperate with his needs, he would cry crocodile tears, real tears, and say, "You don't love me anymore." It was really, really difficult for me. I was a college athlete. I played sports all the way through college. The locker rooms were familiar places to me, and I will tell you that all the way through college, you can ask any of my teammates, I showered in my underwear because I didn't feel safe. So when I heard that we were going to do this, I couldn't agree to help. And now I think a really important distinction to make here is that nobody on my side of the equation, nobody is calling transgender people sex offenders. It doesn't matter how many times I say that, it can't be overstated. But what we are standing opposed to is bad policy written on subjective terms that nobody can prove, because all these bills that I've seen thus far as they come through, they're very subjective. If Andrew wanted to walk into my locker room right now in Washington State, because now it has become law there, and I had a problem with that and I approached him, all he would have to do to stay there is to say that he identified as a woman, and I would be asked to leave. So for me, that feels really offensive, and that feels very re-traumatizing. So throughout all of this, I fought it every which way I could, and I told my boss, "I'm sorry, I just can't do this." And she looked at me and she said, "Kaylee, you know, anytime I find myself feeling the way you're feeling today, I just convince myself that I'm being closed-minded. You are one of the strongest girls I know, so surely you can find the strength to spin this somehow. And ultimately, I lost my job over this. And they gave me two choices. They said you can either be fired on the spot, or you can resign with severance as long as you promise not to speak publicly about how this has all transpired here at the Y. So for me, this was another incident of re-traumatization because I actually settled out of court for my own particular abusive history. I took money to be quiet. And I know to this day that I regret that decision because that man has been out there abusing people. That's what they do. And so I didn't remain silent. Obviously, here I am today. But during this process, I wrestled so hard. And I ended up writing a journal entry. My mom calls it word vomit. I stayed up till midnight. I just could not sleep. I had such a burden over this issue. And I wrote a journal entry. I had no intention of ever having it published. But eventually it was published by the Federalist. It's been shared over 1 million times, and it's not because I'm a strong writer, it's because so many women across the country identify with what I was saying. And I can't tell you that, there's not a day that goes by that I don't hear from another rape survivor who says, thank you for speaking up, I still haven't. I'm 75 years old, and I still haven't told anybody what's happened to me. And it's not just the threat of predators that is traumatic for women. It is the stripping of their voice, the silencing of their voice. 68% of sexual abuse survivors will never tell another person. You can look that stat up, you'll find it's consistent throughout. 68%, it thrives in secrecy, in silence, and shame. So when we have these women who are finally speaking up in their own defense and saying, hey, this violates a really important boundary, I don't feel safe, and we have the media calling them names, like bigots, like fearmongers, like haters, that's not right. And so if you are a member of the media, I just appeal to you, please don't do that. That is really harmful. And if you are a survivor, and you can find in yourself the courage to speak up, I just applaud that because it's really hard and it's becoming increasingly difficult. Not more than 2 months after this officially went into place in Washington State, there was a man who presented as a man and looked by all means to be a man, who walked into a locker room, a women's locker room in Washington State, while teenage girls were getting ready for swim team. And when they asked him to leave, he said, well, I have a right to be here. And nobody could prove him wrong because he gets to determine how he identifies. So he got to be there. He went and he worked out. And guess what? He came back after he was done, and he got to stay there again. Now I ask you how compassionate it is to tell those teenage girls who were showering that this is okay, because there wasn't a police report that was filed. Nothing happened to him, and they watched it. What does that communicate to them about their value? For me to turn around in a locker room situation, which is already traumatic enough, and be confronted with the male anatomy when I wasn't expecting it, that's a trigger. Okay, we talk a lot about triggers these days in safe spaces. Where are the safe spaces for women? Where are the safe spaces for people like me? Why does my trigger not matter? Why is it okay for people to tell me to get over it? Because I will tell you that there was one doctor who did a study of the brains of children who've been sexually abused. And what he found over a course of time is that the cortisol levels in these children's brains were almost exactly the same as what you would expect to find in a Vietnam vet. Because PTSD is a real thing too. So for me to turn around and see that puts me into a bad spot. Of the 20 million Americans who have experienced attempted or completed rape, 17 million of them are women. There are 6 million upskirt videos in circulation. Not a week will go by without you hearing about another creep trying to get into a girl's bathroom and abusing her. And yet it's okay to tell these women that their needs don't matter, that their voices are irrelevant, that they're fear-mongering, and that this is what we call victim shaming. This is actually also what we call rape culture. Because I asked at the Y, I said, well, now you're blurring this huge line where before, if Andrew walked in, I could say, hey, red flag, that seems unsafe to me. Now I'm not allowed to say that. So at what point can I speak up in our defense? Is it when he starts to undress? Well, no, obviously he's going to have to do that in the locker room. And I'm going to get a little bit graphic here, and I apologize, but you can imagine what it would be like to experience it would be a little bit worse. I said, what if there's somebody in the shower next to me who has an erection? Can I then speak up? Am I then allowed to say that this is dangerous? And the answer was no. That's a normal bodily function. Sometimes that happens. There's warm water. And so what has happened with this law in Washington State is that this important line that's existed to keep women safe, people call it discrimination, this is a safety boundary is what it is, has been stripped and violated, and women are being told that they can't speak up until it's too late. And what you'll hear people say is, well, you know, the laws are still in existence. If somebody violates you, you can still call 911. To me, that's basically the same as saying, you know what, go ahead and ride that roller coaster. We removed the harnesses because they were bothering some people, and if anything bad happens to you, we'll call 911. That's too late. The most important component of any safety plan is prevention, and that's what this blurs. Do we need reasonable accommodations for transgender individuals? Absolutely. Do we need to be respectful of their safety and their privacy? Yes, emphatically yes. But that doesn't need to look like stripping voices from people who are also already vulnerable. It doesn't need to look like telling women that they need to get over it. Because I will tell you that I've done some research on this subject. And over 100 years ago, in Victorian England, there was a woman named Rose Adams who had to write 5 years worth of letters to get sex-specific bathrooms in the first place. And every time she appealed, people would tell her, you don't need them, just hold it. We've been told to just hold it, to get over it. This is not progress. This is regression. This is the wrong side of history. So I spoke to a girl 2 days ago, actually, who didn't have any skin in the game, who's not into this at all. But she told me, gosh, I'm thinking about this differently now because I went to my gym today in Seattle, and when I walked in there, in the first row of lockers, there was a fully naked male. And she said she had to wrestle with what to do next. She turned around, am I in the wrong locker room? Turned right back in, said, I guess this is where I have to go. Went back into the back corner where the private stalls were, the bathrooms, and realized that all the other women in the locker room had done the same thing. Cowering in the corner, hiding in shame, trying to keep their privacy intact, while somebody walked around freely, exposing himself. I asked her, how come you didn't report this to management? And she said, what are they going to do? And so the question that Massachusetts has before them is, what are you going to do? Is this okay? Is this a good solution? I would say that it's not, because that woman told me that later on that day, she saw that same person walking around fully presenting as male in male garb. And so this is how this plays out. You might not hear it in police reports because it's not getting reported. So I just appeal to you on those grounds. Please consider this thoroughly. This is not wisdom. You know, my boss at home says that, well, everybody discriminates. If you have a front door on your house, that's discrimination. All it is the boundary. The question is not whether or not people discriminate. The question is whether or not what you're doing is safe and wise and good for the most amount of people. And so those are the questions I would really ask you to wrestle with as you consider these policies, because there are a lot of women who can't speak up yet, and they need you to take a stand.
Even if you aren't a survivor of sexual assault, I think it's still very difficult if you're in a woman's only space and a man is there. It should be a young woman's choice when she first sees fully developed male anatomy. It should be a woman's choice, regardless of age, of whose male anatomy she sees. We have laws prohibiting indecent exposure. We've fought very hard for women to be able to control their own bodies and control what they feel like their sexual experiences. And the way that this bathroom bill is written, we're undermining all of that work. And as Kaylee so beautifully said, this isn't about saying that transgendered people are criminals, they're bad. We're not saying they're bad people. We're just saying that the way this is done is hurting women. That we want women's only spaces. Title IX, which allowed women's only teams, was a huge victory for women athletes, allowing them to compete separately from men. As you discussed, women's only restrooms, locker rooms, women's only gyms are a big thing. They're hugely popular because a lot of women feel like, just working out without guys around. And the way what this bill does is it says all of those things aren't important. It says that somebody's feelings on which sex they are or being trapped in a different body trump our feelings of safety and modesty. There must be a different way in which we can acknowledge the feelings of people who suffer from gender identity disorder without harming women. The feminist in me is appalled by this, and the fact that there's penalties attached to it is also very difficult. In normal functioning society, someone does something that makes you uncomfortable, you should be able to say, hey, wait a minute, that makes me uncomfortable. All of a sudden, if there's criminal and civil penalties attached to that, you as a woman don't have a right to say, hey, by the way, what you're doing doesn't make me comfortable. As a lawyer, I absolutely deplore the subjective standards that are used in this bill. It's about feelings. It's about, well, I can say I feel like I'm a woman. It's not about an objective standard. An objective standard protects both sides. Protects the people who think that somebody's overstepping their bounds. They can say, hey, here's this thing you did, and the law doesn't allow for that. It also protects people who might be told that they're not allowed to do something that they want to do. No matter what our laws say, they should be objective. That's the only way to enforce them without discrimination. If we're going to talk about discrimination, subjective laws are a great way to discriminate against people. And with that, I will turn the microphone back over to Andrew, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Bridget. And I do want to emphasize one point that Bridget made, is that this law, if it is passed, comes with criminal penalties. If I, as a father, heard about that scenario that Kaylee spoke of, where there was a man walking around the women's locker room, and my daughter or wife was in that women's locker room, and I went in and asked that man to leave, I can go to jail for up to a year under Massachusetts law if this bill is passed. And that's something that we need to take note of, where the criminal penalties are in this case. I now want to introduce Elizabeth Fournier, who is from Seekonk, Massachusetts, and is a volunteer with Renew Massachusetts Coalition, to share her thoughts on this bill.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. As an 18-year-old woman, I must tell you that House Bill 4253 is a great concern to me. While this bill hopes to reduce the discomfort that transgender individuals might feel by being in a particular bathroom, what this bill would really do is shift the discomfort to other individuals. In many cases, those who will suffer the most from this redistribution of discomfort are women and children. This bill enshrines one individual's desire to express themselves with a chosen gender identity, but at the same time will violate another person's right to gender privacy. Nothing is gained by the passing of this bill except to favor one group over another, based on entirely subjective criteria. I understand that, for example, it is uncomfortable for a man who dresses as a woman to go into a men's bathroom or locker room. However, by passing this bill, we are now simply shifting the discomfort to other individuals. It solves one problem by creating another. It's a zero-sum game. But what is even more troubling is that one of the unintended consequences of this bill would be that a zone of privacy and safety for women and children that has been recognized by our society for centuries would be abolished by this law. Our society has long upheld the idea that women should be able to expect privacy and safety in a bathroom setting. The idea that a man would just walk in to the zone of privacy should be an alarm to us. In recent times, we have been told, and rightly so, that if we see something suspicious, we should report it. A bystander's sense of alarm in such a situation can be an effective means of protecting women and children from predatory men. This bill effectively outlaws a common sense response. One of the primary functions of government is to provide for public safety, but the passage of HB 4253 would criminalize the protections that our society has long upheld throughout its history. So what we really have with this bill is, on the one hand, the intended benefit ends up being a zero-sum game, where some are afforded something at the expense to others. But on the other hand, we have introduced an entirely new problem, where common sense precautions for the safety of women and children are undermined and, even worse, made illegal. This would have a chilling effect on the freedom of all members of our society to speak freely in a situation where they believe there is a potential threat to others. This is unacceptable to me as a young woman, and I believe I am speaking for the vast majority of women in Massachusetts who are concerned about the violation of our personal right to privacy and safety. HB 4253 is a bill that accomplishes nothing except exchanging one type of discomfort for another, while undermining the privacy and safety of women and children. Thank you.
I'm now proud to introduce a strong advocate for women's rights on this issue in particular, Representative Shauna O'Connell.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here today. My name is Shauna O'Connell, State Representative for the 3rd Bristol District, Taunton and Easton. And I'm here today because I believe in protecting the rights of everyone. And that includes my 2 young daughters. This bill doesn't protect people's rights. It takes away people's rights. It takes away the rights of my daughters and every other young girl and woman to feel safe and secure in public bathrooms and locker rooms. The definition of gender identity is so vague that it makes bathrooms and locker rooms basically a free-for-all, giving access to people with nefarious intentions, unlimited access to places where women and children are most vulnerable. I was elected because I am committed to keeping the people safe, all people safe, and to standing up for all rights of all people. I don't want to have to tell my daughters to hold it because they feel scared or uncomfortable going into a locker room. We owe it to all children and women in this state to not pass this bill with this vague language. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative O'Connell. It's now my pleasure to introduce a man who really fought hammer and tong on this bill at the Senate Judiciary hearing, Representative Jim Lyons from Manville.
Thank you very much, Andrew. This bill is a very simple bill, and it's about eliminating long-held expectation rights of privacy. That's what this bill does. It is going to eliminate the long-held expectation of privacy in our restrooms. In addition, it is going to eliminate protection for our children in locker rooms and in restrooms. I asked the question, if we're taking away rights from 99.9% of the population, just who are we protecting? So let's just think about that for a minute. If someone has transitioned from a male to a female, they would use the female bathroom. If someone transitions from a female to a male, they would use the male bathroom. So what is this bill all about? It's about progressives pushing a radical social agenda upon us. And this is a very, very serious bill that we have to fight back and prevent this from taking place. Because they are trying to basically change society. They want us to accept that someone can get up in the morning and decide, today I'm a male, or today I'm a female. When this law first passed 5 years ago, we sat down with the Commissioner of Education, Chester Mitchell Chester, and we asked him the question of how did you arrive at putting this bill together, and who did you talk to? And Mitchell Chester said, well, we talked to people who wanted to see the bill pass. And did you talk to anybody who didn't want to see the bill pass? No, we didn't do that. So this was after the bill got passed and they were putting together regulations for our schools. And the question I asked them was very simple. If a young 6-year-old or 7-year-old or 9-year-old girl went into the bathroom and she was accosted by a 15-year-old middle school student who was 15 and 175 pounds. I said, did you think about the impact that would have on that little girl? And the Commissioner of Education's responsibility is to protect all of our children said, no, I never even thought about that. And that is what's happening here. Nobody is thinking about that. And that is what we're trying to do today. We're trying to raise awareness. This bill does nothing but take away rights. The rights of 99.9% of the population, and it is simply a bad law. They have made the argument, the proponents, that this law needs to be put in place to protect people from discrimination. That's how they began the argument 7 months ago. Because of the work of Andrew and many others, they no longer make the argument. They want you to, as you pointed out earlier, just hold it. We're to accept what they want, and if we say anything, we're the ones that are called bigots and haters. Well, I'm not a bigot, and I'm not a hater. My job as a legislator is to protect the children and my residents of Massachusetts, and I intend to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. You remind us of a good point that back in 2011, this legislature passed broad protections legally against discrimination for individuals who struggle with gender identity issues, with the one exception from those protections being bathrooms, locker rooms, and other legally lawfully sex-segregated facilities for what, at that time at least, were obvious reasons. And so you had to get overwhelming opposition in the legislature to violate privacy rights, particularly women and children. And we asked them to continue to hold that line in defense of those most vulnerable in our society. At this time, any of the other legislators would like to speak? Very well. Are there any questions from the press at this time, either for myself or for Kyler? Yes, ma'am. Sure. The status of this bill is actually 2 bills. There's a Senate bill, which is 735. That is, as I understand it, scheduled to be debated tomorrow in the Senate. So we asked the Senate to not pass this bill and to end it right there. The House bill, 4253, is also out of committee. It's a slightly different version, basically with a cosmetic difference. Will have the same impact. That bill is not scheduled to be debated yet. We hope that it doesn't get to be debated because we believe this is a common sense issue. We don't want this to move any further than it already has. So I'm particularly pleased to see a number of legislators here. We know they will work hard to stop this bill and defend the rights to privacy and safety for our citizens. Any other questions? Well, again, thank you for coming. I do have copies, either myself or Jonathan Alexander in the back there, of the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination statement on this bill. They do support the bill, but they say very clearly that all of these rights and protections are covered, with the exception of bathrooms, as well as some other documentation for members of the media, if you would like so. Again, thank you for coming.